everybody. It's Mike Preston at New Harbor Financial. It is Thursday, January 25th. And we have had so many requests about a book called The Great Taking that we decided that we wanted to do a little research on it and provide our opinion, basically New Harbor's statement. So there's been a lot of buzz about this. This has been one of the few times that we've been asked, maybe by 20 or 30 different clients, what our opinion is on this book. And I'm going to share to the screen here the book. And you can go to thegreattaking.com and you can see the cover of the book. You can also see here that there's documentary links here. There's a documentary out on this. There's several interviews. I believe Catherine Austin Fitz did an interview with David Webb. I saw one that Greg Hunter at USA Watchdog did as well. And you can actually download the book here and read the free PDF. It's a pretty short book. It's an easy read. And I'd love to just share some of my thoughts here with you. I read the book a couple times, watched the documentaries, and I agree with a lot. We agree with a lot that the book says. And in a nutshell, the book talks about the central banks, not just the US Fed, although that's the biggest one and the most powerful one. It is the central banks all around the world that really have gotten completely out of control, and they've overstepped their bounds and their charter, and they have put us in dangerous territory. So I've got some notes I'd like to go through. I think there's some salient points here. And David Webb talks about the Great Taking 1.0 that actually happened almost 100 years ago. The Great Depression that happened during the 1930s was the Great Taking 1.0. People were encouraged to use leverage throughout the roaring 20s. You could buy stocks with 10% down. There was a lot of speculation going on in the stock market and in real estate. Well, there was a big crash that happened over a 3-year period. The market topped in October 1929 and didn't bottom until 1932. By the time it was all done, the Dow was down 89%. And the economy went through a Great Depression for most of the 30s. In fact, it wasn't until World War II, the end of World War II, that we came out of the Great Depression. By the way, that is the last time we had a so-called fourth turning. A lot of our clients, a lot of people that we talk to know about the fourth turning theory. There's a book by Neil Howe, and his co-author, I think, is Strauss, who's deceased now, but they wrote the original book. And the fourth turning basically describes a climactic time. And these times tend to come around every 80 years or so. I believe we're in a fourth turning. I believe that what we're living through for many decades here is a financial war, or a financial sort of war. And this is all about control. So the Great Depression 1.0, or the Great Taking 1.0, was during the Great Depression. During that time, anybody that extended themselves with debt found themselves to be in a very difficult spot because nobody had cash. Really, there was just a complete absence of cash, and a lot of people were foreclosed upon. And so they lost their assets due to foreclosure, but also a number of banks went under. Some banks were allowed to reopen. Those were banks that were chosen by the Fed. It's not really fair, but some of the banks were allowed to reopen and customers recoup their deposits. Other banks were not allowed, were not chosen by the Fed, and depositors there lost their deposits. And around this time, that led to the introduction of the FDIC, or Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation Act. But this has been going on a long time, and the real risks are extension or having debt during an asset price collapse. So David Webb talks about the things that have changed over the last couple decades, which we took a look at. And to be honest, there's some concern that there's some legal precedent for the code that's in place to cause a quote unquote great taking to happen. I think it's a long shot. Talk about why in just a minute, but let me just recap some of the salient points. The UCC, the Uniform Commercial Code of 1994, was introduced in 1994. And it was introduced as a way to protect corporations for interstate commerce. It is not a federal law. It is a law, or a standardization of code, I should say, that is accepted now by all 50 states. And so the UCC it introduces this concept called security entitlement, where basically shareholders are called entitlement holders. It's concerning because it gets into the notion of what happens in the collapse of an institution. The central clearing counterparties, or the CCPs, these are the big counterparties, and a lot of them are pretty well-known big banks that you would know about, that have many trillions of dollars of derivatives on the books. These are what David Webb says are concerning. He actually says that it's estimated that there's maybe 2 quadrillion worth of derivatives worldwide, and it could be right. It's not up to me to decide. I'm not sure if that's right. I wouldn't be surprised if that's close to right. Other high-profile people, even Warren Buffett's been on record in recent years saying that derivatives are what scares him. And anyone that really knows what's going on and looks into it, you understand that there's many, many mountains of derivatives, and that is a concern if a central clearing party were to go under. Now, one point that's pretty important, I think, is that it's only the net effect that would be at risk. So if there's what David Webb says, 2 quadrillion worth of notional derivatives, essentially, if a counterparty were to fail, or if there was an economic collapse, you would take all the different derivatives, you would net them against each other, and it's only what's left over. So if you have $1 million of derivatives on one side and $1 million of derivatives on the other side, one is long and the other one's short. Once they're netted out against each other, there's no net exposure. But there would indeed be some net exposure left, and who knows what that would look like. We don't know, first of all, if any counterparties would ever fail, and if they did, which ones. If they all failed, I guess that would be a different situation. But if a counterparty failed, then they would go in and they would net out all the positions and see what's left over. The Uniform Commercial Code seems to say that the security entitlement holders are more junior than other creditors. So this is an issue. Now, do I really think that this could ever happen and that people would simply lose their assets? I can't imagine that would happen. And it's impossible to predict. But David Webb says that the code is there that would allow this pathway to exist. And based on my reading of the book, I can't refute that it seems like the language says that. We've also seen in recent years things like Silicon Valley Bank being bailed out, the so-called billionaires bank by the Fed. There's been just a consistent reaction by the Fed to bail out everything. Look back to what happened in 2008. Nobody went to jail. Some people got rich. It wasn't really fair. That's when this fourth turning really started, I think, 15 years ago. And since then, the whole system has changed. The rules are completely different. And what we're having trouble really doing is predicting how this can look. It's clear to us that we have incredibly hyper overvalued markets that cannot earn a fair return from these levels. In other words, they have to drop. We can't predict that they will, but all super bubbles are this way. They eventually collapse. Even David Webb says the system is designed to collapse. It has to. So will it? I don't know for sure. I think the market will. And do I think that central clearing parties could go bust? Do I think that could then be extended to the securities entitlement holders? Do I think people can lose their assets? I think it's a long shot. I think the Fed would bail out such things if they were more limited in scope. If it was a global meltdown, I don't know what that would look like. There's a lot of different ways to control people. And this is what it's all about. The central bank, the central planners want control. It's always been about control. It always will be about control. There's a lot of different things that can happen. For instance, the government could say that you have to put your IRAs in government bonds, or at least some percentage of it. That could happen. The government might say, we're going to replace the currency with a central bank digital currency. And people will line up and take it because that's what they want, is they want an easy fix. I'm sad to say that, but it's true. And with that, I think would come more control and some loss of freedom, and certainly you could be controlled, or you could be incentivized or disincentivized to spend your money on certain things versus other things. So all of that's really bad. But I think that people are really in a panic about the fact that they might wake up and lose everything. I can't imagine that's a possibility. Just imagine that everybody loses everything, or everybody loses a chunk of something. I think the streets would be on fire tomorrow morning if that happened today. I don't see that happening. I really, really don't. No, but I can't refute that the code seems to be such that it could be interpreted that way. And so that's one thing that I think is difficult about the book, because it raises alarm. And I know that David is simply trying to raise awareness about this and spread the word, and I commend him for that. But I don't see a lot of solutions. And this is, people are afraid. People are afraid about this. And there's very few ways to completely protect yourself in this world. I'll talk about a few things that I think David agrees make sense and that we agree make sense as well. Number one, reduce debt. We've been saying this for a long time. Reduce debt. It makes sense. Don't give yourself any reason to be put under pressure if there is a collapse. Now, the way we're managing money, we are looking to protect the downside primarily. We'd like to participate some in the upside, but we don't want to take a big downside hit if and when we're right about an ultimate collapse. Assuming that money still exists, assuming that the market still exists after all of that, we think our job is to bring people through that chasm. And we think that those things will still exist, and there'll be much better opportunities ahead, but there's going to be a lot of damage in what we think is going to be the biggest bear market of our lives. We don't know when it's going to happen. We think we're in the final kind of end chapter here, very close to it. But our job is to get people through that. Now, what will that look like in that crisis? Will central bank digital currency be introduced? Will some of these clearing corporations go under? Probably. But the chance of you losing everything based on the UCC and the other things in this book, I think, are very, very low. I really don't think it's going to happen. I think it's much more likely that the whole system's bailed out again, or attempted to be bailed out again with an introduction of digital currency. That won't fix everything. I mean, the ills that have been perpetrated, the distortions we've seen in wealth disparity will stay. There's no way to turn that back and make it right again. But I don't think that the primary fear is to worry about losing everything. I think that if you pay off debt, if you can, I think that's a great first step. Also, own some gold and silver. We recommend that people own 10% of their investable net worth in gold and silver. Investments in real estate make sense. Bottom line is get out of debt and buy real things. David talks about having some resilience, some access to food and water and things like that. Community, society, relationships are the most important thing in life, a lot more important than money. Although I would say that money is the most important thing if you don't have any. Once you have some and then a little bit more, the most important things are relationships and your connections to people. So get out of debt, have some gold and silver, have some real estate. But what are you going to do about everything else? Well, so many people have financial assets, and there's no way for me to say there's absolutely no risk of the great taking happening. I really can't say that. But also to tell you to get completely out of financial assets is somewhat irresponsible, because we don't know that this is going to happen. We don't know what the path is going to look like. We'd like to have some financial assets to deploy at better levels in the market when we have this reset. So those are some things that I think, after reading the book and looking at the documentaries. David says that the central planners know that we're in a financial war, that they'll create a lot of disruptions. I agree. The climax of this fourth turning, which is probably in the next 5 years, is going to provide us with a lot of surprises. The good news is that after the fourth turning is what's called a first turning, a wonderful time in the economy, a wonderful time of growth and prosperity. But we're in the climax now, and a lot of things are going to happen between now and the end of this period, including probably some kind of economic collapse and more control and or at least attempts at more control by central banks. I don't think that you have to worry about losing all your assets. I do think you've got to worry about a stock market collapse. I do think you should think about getting out of debt, adding to your physical precious metals and any other physical assets that you have or can get. And in the end, David talks about a financial transfer tax, getting rid of the IRS code and replacing the need to file a tax return with a financial transfer tax. He suggests a 0.1% tax on all financial transactions. I really can't comment on that much. I love the idea of a flat tax. I'm not much of a politician, to be honest, but I'm for simplicity. So if an idea like that works, if an idea like that is fair, I think that would be okay. I think that most people would accept some different idea other than the 7,000 pages of IRS code that we currently have. So in closing, it's all about control. It has been for a long time, close to 100 years, and it probably always will be. But the key is don't despair. There's better times ahead once we get through what's coming. I do believe the US dollar will be good, at least for the early parts of what this crisis is going to be. So what we're doing, what we suggest people do after they reduce debt and make sure they have metals and other real assets is to hold liquid cash, US dollars, have a plan of how are you going to deploy down at lower levels. I don't think you're going to lose all your assets. If you're taking too much risk in the stock market, you could lose a good chunk of your assets, but I don't think you're going to lose your assets through this mechanism that the Great Taking talks about. If this book raises awareness in lawmakers and in the public, I think it's a good thing because ultimately the Federal Reserve has to be changed. David Webb talks about the Federal Reserve and central banks being a public utility. I agree, it should not be a private club. It is essentially a private club now, an unelected club that has infinite power, way too much power. These people are extremely intelligent, but they have overstepped their bounds, I believe, for far too long. And they put us at great risk of a lot of pain, a lot of financial pain and despair. I hope it's better than I fear it might be, but I don't want people to panic and think they're going to lose everything and, that's it. I think this is going to be a process. I think it's going to be okay. I appreciate the people that put their trust in us. We try very hard to do our best and to tell the truth as we see it. So thank you for joining us. I hope we gave you some insight that you can use. And until next time, this is Mike Preston at New Harbor. Thank you for watching. See you soon.